This is a rather special film today because I'm sitting talking to Martin Clarkson, who's been on an incredible adventure, which started almost in Russia.
Pretty close, Stuart. It's lovely to come and talk to you about it and actually look at some of the great memories filmed here in Bardo, which is not far from where we embarked. You join these cruises right at the top of Norway, such a short distance from the Russian border at Kirkenes. And then a few hours later you arrive here in Bardo, just right on the tip of Norway, the northern point. And already, although it's a grey day, you're beginning to see the livelihood here is the water. It's the fishing industry. Shellfish, swordfish, this is what everyone here lives or exists.
And you rushed on at Kirkenes, didn't film because you were worried about being left in Russia.
Well, like all those moments, I mean, you've done so many of these. There is a way of getting on board, and you don't seem to have a lot of time once you get on. By the time you got yourself settled in the cabin and begun to get used to the geography of the vessel, you're moving.
Yeah. I often say to people when they get on, especially places like Malta, don't waste your time looking at the ship or the geography of the ship. Go and see Malta and then see the ship when you start sailing.
Yeah, that's such good advice because, look, all these moments will be missed.
Yeah.
And in a moment, we're going to be out at sea as we say goodbye to the port, and then you can have a great and probably better timed opportunity to walk around and get used to your bearings.
So how these people from Vardo and Kirkenes, are they like Norwegians or are they Russians, or how do they feel themselves?
It's a remarkable mix. This cruise, and it is a cruise, it's an exploration down the coast of Norway to visit as many of the fjords as possible. It belongs, therefore, to a lot of day trippers who get on as you go. 33 ports we passed during 1 week. So lots of day trippers, but lots of holidaymakers on board. And they're German, European, many French, German Europeans, and 1 or 2 Russians.
So, on board, the language that's used over the PA?
Norwegian and English.
Okay.
And currency Norwegian throughout.
So do you have to pay for things, or are you on a cruise card?
You're on a cruise card, but there are supplements, and we're going to look at some of these as we watch some of the footage. There are 2 levels of dining, and there's a supplement if you want to enjoy the tasting menu, and there's a supplement for a variety of explorations where you can get off and go see while the ship either waits or continues its voyage.
So this is an interesting place, isn't it? Because this is the northernmost point.
This is North Cape.
Yeah.
Which is the northernmost point in Europe, and it looks like this. It's eerie. You're above the clouds, and then just as you turn, as we're doing now, right in front of you, the clouds lift, and almost the whole week's adventure is unveiled. It's like a map being opened to say, there's the side of Norway. There's an assortment of fjords. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. And we're here at the northernmost part of Europe. Kilometres from the Russian border, the tip of Finland, we're at the top of Norway. Ready to start not a cruise, but our voyage of discovery, an expedition.
Wow. And there are things you can do, aren't there? It's not like you can go fishing, you can go lobster fishing, crab fishing.
There's a range of all of those expeditions, all very cleverly nipped into the journey as you go. And as I say, you can get off for an hour and enjoy a visit to one of those churches or cathedrals or day markets, or you can get off for a few hours and let the boat continue its journey and pick it up at one of the later ports.
When did you feel like you were entering something you recognised as... because obviously when you're far north and it's like very Russian, as you got nearer, did you start to feel, oh, this is more the Europe I know?
Do you know, that's a great question, because it's almost watching a scene change in the theatre. By day 2, and it's crossing the Arctic Circle and you're coming down, suddenly the curtain lifts And from this moment, where you're right up on the cape of the northernmost tip, suddenly there's a different feel of Norway. There's much more greenery. The greyness moves. Now, we were lucky, the sun shone throughout the whole week, but you were very much aware that from day 2 onwards, there was a very strong green glow to the shoreline.
Do any of these places have industry apart from fishing? I know Norway, there's some steel, isn't there, that's probably more Narvik area, where during World War II the Germans took it because they wanted the steel. Is there any industry, fish? What is it that you came across?
Well, one thing I should share with you, Stuart, because it's a good answer to your question, is how this ship was powered. It's powered by LNG, liquid natural gas, and indeed electric. And Norway is harvesting both. It's quite a serious industry, and it's making it a very rich nation and a good ally within Europe. So I also think it's not a surprise when you look at the areas we're covering that fishing and fisheries became so important, because it's such a coastline and such rich waters for shellfish and indeed fish farms, salmon, trout, all along the coastline.
I suppose when we visit these, you stand in this, like in the middle of there, nowhere, you feel kind of isolated, or I would, but the people who live there, that's natural to them, so I guess they're not in the same way as we would be isolated, or do they feel that?
There's a real variance in the size of ports. I was surprised. Some of the ports we stopped at, like we're watching here, where fresh fish comes on board to be taken down to the cities further south, or indeed put on the table in the restaurant on board that evening. Yet again, we're coming alongside one of these small harbours in the fjord. We've entered through a tiny entrance right in the harbour wall there that, again, you could never get a cruise ship through there. The dexterity of these small boats is incredible. It brings the luxury of cruising into the size of a small boutique voyage. And at the moment, we're trying to come right alongside this small harbour, spinning ourselves around as the different thrusters are working. The magic of these voyages carries well on into the evening. The clarity during the day of the fjords is gorgeous, as the shoreline is crystal clear. You're never far away from the edge. You can almost touch the edge of each of the fjords. But in the evening, the magic steps up a level. Yes, this is evening. This, remember, is the land of the midnight sun. It's almost midnight as we make our way now to the city of Tromsø, where we'll arrive just after midnight for evensong in the cathedral. The magic continues. It rarely gets darker than this. In fact, I believe at this time of year, and it's now early August, there's about 20 minutes to 40 minutes of darkness somewhere about 1 o'clock in the morning. Either way, the luxury doesn't stop. On board this eco voyage, it's just all memories. Quite remarkable. And also bright sun. In the land of the midnight sun, it's as light and as bright and as warm as a summer's day. And we're now on our way to Tromsø. We'll be there by midnight, just in time to catch the cathedral and the choir with evensong. Well, it's just after midnight, and we've now docked at Tromsø. And everyone's coming off board to walk across the city square to the cathedral for evensong. Thank you.
Where you please, sir.
Thank you.
Right on.
Good evening. Sorry we're late.
Oh, it's fine. Was it because of the fog?
It was.
Yeah, we reckoned.
The captain got lost. I take one of these?
Yeah, take one of those.
Thank you very much. So here we are in the Tromsø Cathedral, awaiting the start of tonight's recital. As dawn breaks and a new day begins, the shimmer on the horizon is a piece of therapy. The calmness of the water in all of the fjords at this time of year just makes the whole experience quite unusual. Setting it again away from a standard voyage to an expedition. But an expedition in extreme comfort, particularly if you make sure you have the comfort of your own balcony to enjoy it.
So now you've finished the cruise and you've seen huge fjords and tiny fjords. Was it quite wonderful to go to the small ones? I've never been to a small fjord.
Well, I for me, it was my first experience of doing them at all, and having chatted with you, Stuart, I'm now much clearer on how accessible the larger fjords are to the wider range of cruise ships. So there was a privilege in being get into these smaller fjords. It was a piece of navigation that was quite remarkable when you watched the space between the edge of the vessel and the size of the side of the cliffs. So it was a real privilege to watch. And you know that feeling when you breathe in when you're driving and you're going through a narrow gap? I think everyone was breathing in as they went down the walls of these smaller fjords. They are natural, majestic places to visit.
It's just reminded me of a joke. There's a joke, a standard joke, that all cruise ship comedians use when you're going through the fjords. And it's like, oh, what, another wooden hut? But I've not seen any wooden huts here. It's not like the fjords that I'm used to. It's very different.
Well, it's lovely you say that, because you're a very experienced cruiser. You and Doris have been, I suspect, on most of the major cruise lines in this part of the world. So I do believe that we were experiencing something else. We were getting into those almost secret, smaller fjords that the larger cruise ships just could not begin to navigate.
I guess what I would probably like to have done, but again, it's time, isn't it? This is where you start to go beyond. I want to go further than this cruise takes me. It is, for example, when we went through India, we'd get off the boat that we were on onto a tiny little boat and go through little inlets and see villages where people were doing their washing in the streams and stuff. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what it would be like here, but I do feel like I'd like to go in and see more.
Well, that's interesting. One of the expeditions that you're offered is just that. Smaller vessels came alongside and you were allowed then to disappear for 6-7 hours, getting closer to both the bird life colonies and some of the salmon and trout farming, and then come back alongside the boat further down the coast. So there's a lot of that activity available if that's what you want to do. One of the joys of the Norwegian voyage is that over the 5 or 6 days you get to visit 33 ports, each dotted as a small harbour alongside the fjords. The routine for coming into each of these harbours is the same. The bow is pushed into the centre of the harbour, aiming directly at the centrepiece, and then the thrusters spin the vessel around. It all happens as a space of a few moments. The dexterity of these small vessels is quite remarkable. Let's have a look on the other side and see what's happening there. And now the turn is complete, and very quickly the vessel starts to ease itself alongside the harbour wall. As I said, it all happens in a space of a few moments. It's done with amazing ease, and we'll be loaded and unloaded and away again in 10 or 15 minutes. A few people waiting on the quayside to come aboard, a few others to leave, and then 1 or 2 goodies for the restaurants. I gather the scallops are coming on board here this morning. The heavy ropes are pulled over the bollards, tightened on board. And with that rope firmly secure and Capella firmly in place, the race then begins. And it's a bit like a Formula One pit stop. In this particular port, there's 10 minutes to unload passengers, load new passengers, and exactly 8 minutes later, the cargo doors are closed, the ropes are loosened, and we're away. Just one of the daily visits from these vessels, serviced by Havila Cruises and its sister excursion company, servicing, yes, the tourist industry, but also a key artery for these islands in and around the fjords, bringing much needed supplies and taking away the beautiful fish and shellfish that'll be enjoyed tonight in the Hildring restaurant. As we creep bust below the road bridges that cross the arteries of the fjords. And from one beautiful fjord, you're now able to enter yet another. The stillness of the water continues. The sparkle of the mountain landscape is now a given. And another day begins on board Capella.
Let's do the flag waving and we'll chat again.
And as we approach the Norwegian border, there's a rather charming tradition on board Havila ships that everybody grabs hold of a Norwegian flag in celebration and waves. They come in all sizes. I'm not sure anybody's necessarily checking whether they're holding them the right way up. And I'm not sure how many flags are lost on a windier day than today, but obviously it's a moment that particularly the Norwegians on board hold very dear. And as the borderline approaches, marked by the bridge ahead, the excitement is certainly rising. And the moment is coming, I gather, when the coach reaches the top of the bridge, welcoming the boat into Norway. Our boat will send some sort of signal, and indeed the bus then, I believe, beeps to mark the fact that we're crossing over into the territory. It's got to reach the central span, and that is, as I understand, the celebrations then truly begin. What an exciting... Once again, remember, all of this is being done without one drop of alcohol. What a remarkable race of people.
Yeah, yes, I have no idea how they do it, Martin.
And I want to ask you a question. Those sort of moments on board, they happen a lot, do they, on cruises? It's manufactured for us.
Let me tell you a story. We were coming up from the African coast earlier this year, from South Africa, and there is what's called the Nil Point. That isn't what we gave ABBA. Well, it is what we gave ABBA in the Eurovision Song Contest, Nil Point. But it's the where you've got the longitude and latitude. It's 000, and this is called Soul Boy because all the weather boys are given musical names. And this is Soul Boy, and it's at 000. So our ship went looking for Soul Boy. We circled 3 times and then gave up, and they said, oh, no ship's actually found it for a week now. It could have lost its tether and gone somewhere, but we did get a certificate to say that we'd got to 000 longitude by 0 longitude.
Well, you see, you got a certificate. Everyone waving flags were given a small memento flag to keep. I'm really curious where those little flags are now. Are they on mantelpieces all over the world? I was part of passing the Norwegian border ceremony, and the captain gave me a flag.
They've been saved for the Eurovision Song Contest next year.
Watching the pictures, though, this you are watching yet again this ship continually night and day. And you must remember, if you're booking this cruise, these ports, you also visit them through the night. There'll be 2 or 3 ports during the night, so be prepared that you just might hear some of this activity. This boat is doing a 24/7 service.
So it's best not to sleep for a whole week, so you get to see everything.
Well, one of the joys was if you aren't a great sleeper and you do want to watch something rather than just lie there worrying at 2:30 in the morning, you can come out on your balcony and watch as we empty and refill. Once again, an opportunity to see the power of those rear thrusters as we leave port, turning us right around in this small fjord so that we can travel out straight back towards the fjord entrance.
So this is interesting because we're heading down now towards the Lofoten Islands.
Yeah.
Now the big ships cut across, well, I suppose you'd call it more inland or to the left of where we are, and they would head to Narvik and some of the bigger ports which are in there. But these ships, they connect every small village together, don't they?
They do, and I can understand the big ships taking that route. You probably notice on some of the pieces we've been watching, there are some magnificent bridges in the harbour entrances to a lot of these islands. And whilst the bridges are large and majestic, they're not quite large enough to accommodate some of the larger cruise ships. But Stuart, it's just look at these scenes. It is the most beautiful part of the world.
It's a real treat to see it, isn't it? Like this.
Well, it's partly the joy of the weather, but also accessibility from the water. I don't think there's an alternative. This is the only way to see this coastline and these fjords in this way.
Definitely, there are some of these places are not connected by roads. I know that. So the only way in and out is by water. I tell you what amazes me, being a film person and somebody who comes from drama. Not that you're not, obviously, because you are as well, but yours is more theatre. These places make incredible dramas. They have brilliant actors, and there's some wonderful drama series that you see from Sweden and Norway with subtitles on the television, and you just go, how do they make it this good?
And they are good, aren't they? In fact, one of the favourites of mine, this is a great link, is The Bridge.
Yes.
Which was one of the first ones I remember. And the quality, I mean, you're a filmmaker, so you assess it as you are doing, even more so. They're quite remarkable. But they're great storytellers. And if you look at the heritage of the Vikings, they storytelling and the whole of the word saga is entrenched in their culture.
We must talk more about that when we get further south, because I've got a story which we need to cover, but not up here.
There are fish farms in most of the major fjords, farming salmon and Norwegian trout.
So this also was of real importance during World War II, and I find this quite amazing that somebody would bother to take these ports. But the Germans did take these ports, and they were after them because some of them didn't freeze over, and they were ideal ports.
They were accessible all the way through. In fact, that was true from Kirkenes all the way around. The way that the currents work, they did not freeze over, and therefore they became enormously valuable. And if you look at the positioning of Norway for Europe, sitting almost like the light at the top of the beacon, this was a way of protecting and securing that northern passage.
So down here, these must be the Lofoten Islands, surely now.
Yeah, it's where we're now drifting towards them. And it raises one of the good points you raised earlier about smaller vessels having greater access. This point in the cruise, smaller vessels are available. If you want to take an expedition and disappear up these tiny inlets around the islands, that's easily available. And while I was on board, 6 of these small vessels came alongside and took people away for 2, 3, 4-hour visits around the islands.
And now I think you're heading into Troll Fjord here, which is a sort of a famous fjord that the smaller ships all try and get into. There aren't that many that can do it, but you literally just go in and turn round.
You can, and just look at this view. This is a view where for the first time we're being told we're going to go into this fjord, and you begin to look and say, where's there a space large enough? Where's the gap? Where's the entrance? And then suddenly, as you get closer, it appears. But again, as it appears, it doesn't look large enough. Surely we're not going to go in there. But again, I'm delighted that we can.
And there isn't a road down into Troll Fjord, as far as I know. It's the only way in, is it?
It's the only way in, and in fact, you'll see the geography of it as we get closer. It would be impossible to get a road etched into the cliff sides here. It's a heritage site, so it's heavily protected both for its wildlife and the handling on the water. And again, that's where the LNG and electricity, the sustainable fuels, is given a big tick and a ticket for permission to enter into fords like the Troll.
How much wildlife because I've not seen any cameras. I've not seen people on the side of the ship with cameras taking pictures of wildlife. How much wildlife did you see on this?
It varied. The taking of cameras, though, I think is a really good observation you've made. Somehow, the majesty of it happening, people almost forgot to lift up their camera and record it. There was awesome as we're entering some of this. So I think that was a lovely way to watch human beings at leisure with their cameras. They forgot. The cameras on the way out of the fjord, wow, yes, let's grab those memories. But coming in, there's this, my goodness, are we really going to get through this gap? Are we really going to head down between those cliffs? And we do.
It's very interesting because on some of the bigger cruises that do around the South America, or they go down there South America on the World Cruise, huge fascination from wildlife lovers, and lots of people are really good amateur camera people are on board with cameras taking pictures, and they're all so friendly. They swap pictures, and there's this sort of
camaraderie.
Yeah, and also they tell each other when there's certain things they can photograph, and they love to share it with the rest of us who are not photographers. I've never professed to be a photographer, but you see them on board, and you know they're after all kinds of things.
Well, I have to say, maybe it was the awesome nature of the surroundings, but I didn't find the cameras were in use as much. I think I was the one that was irritating everybody by running around capturing this so I could bring it back to show you. But just look now as we begin to move into some, isn't it idyllic? It is just remarkable to watch this.
Where's this? It doesn't look like you stopped, but they were all standing waving, saying, "Come and get me."
Yeah, it's one of those heritage sites. There's a range of Viking cabins and museums. And again, although the boat didn't stop, there was a smaller vessel that you were able to get on board if you wished to drop into that fjord and then get back to the boats again. There's a variety of expeditions. You can make your trip quite bespoke.
Wow. So would you leave your ship here, go on your expedition, the ship's going into Troll Fjord, and then you get back on the ship on the way out of Troll Fjord?
You can do it that way. You can do it. The Atlantic Way is one of the major roadways that's, in fact, here we are, on cue. There's one of the small RIB vessels which is coming back to the ship, having visited some of the smaller and very inaccessible fjords. Beautiful though, isn't it? I mean, every turn, it's magnificent. It's so difficult not just to stare and say, look at the wonders of this. With less than 100 metres wide, this is the smallest entrance to the fjords in Norway, the Troll Fjord. Absolutely out of bounds to major shipping, but just squeezable by Capella. We're taking it very slowly with only inches to spare on either side. With 1 metre to spare either side.
So another question, do they play music on board as you go through these places?
Now, let me ask you that question. Is that what would happen on some of the larger ships?
Yeah, it is. Like when you were going past that sort of cliff, and there was only inches either side.
Yeah.
In fact, it's in here, isn't it, when you do this? There would be classical music played on deck as they do that.
This didn't happen.
Right.
And I just get a sense that there was a rawness to this. That is almost the authenticity comes from watch it, breathe it, see it, as opposed to your background, the movie set playlist which plays alongside.
Yeah.
Just look at how close we're getting on the sides here, Stuart. This is a moment when, if you look at those people there, they haven't yet remembered to take their cameras out. It is so awesome, you don't believe you're there, and then you remember and grab the camera.
I certainly can remember I've been on a number of ships through some of the bigger fjords, but you get close to the edge and they do play classical music. It is a sort of a thing there.
Well, I'm thrilled at that. I'm trying to think what piece of music would be played. A little bit of Grieg, I suspect, would be sitting perfectly here. But I didn't miss it. Interesting, though, amongst the people standing here are members of the crew. And I said to them, gosh, you've done this too many times. And they said, they readily admit, they said, over 100 times. But every time we come up the Troll Fjord and we do this spin around at the top where almost in the dimensions of the vessel, it spins in its own shape, its own footprint. We love it. It's a miracle.
Now, I'm sure everybody's waiting for me to ask you whether or not you saw a troll.
Do you know, I missed it.
Apparently it's two trolls who live in the caves in Trollfjord, and they used to fight over the land for their cows. But I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. What is this old place?
Again, this is a piece of the Viking heritage, which is sitting a little further down the coast, and there is the fisherwoman, who's the entrance to their fishing harbour, who's waving a good fortune as you pass, and to those who are on fishing expeditions, good fortune to return safely.
But are they building a Viking village, or is it what is it that's there? They're not.
No, it's part of the past, and again, it's part of the heritage site. Sadly, it was a port that we didn't visit going south. It's one that's visited north, and that's a good point to make if you're looking at these cruises, because there are a choice of stopover points. Different points stopped going north as going south, and you can pick and choose then which one suits you, or do the full 2 weeks and enjoy it both ways.
Sunsets, look at these.
Well, sunsets are glorious, and of course you are. And when the northern part in the land of the midnight sun, as we saw earlier.
And they're kayaking as well. Did you do that off the ship?
No, we didn't, and I'm delighted we didn't. I certainly wouldn't have volunteered. But there are, I noticed, 1 or 2 vessels where the kayaks and some of the boarding was on board, and you would tell me that from your own experience now. All of this is part of the fun of being on the water.
Yeah, I've not been on a ship that's kept kayaks on board. More and more ships are keeping electric bikes on board.
Well, electric bikes are available on board here, but more importantly, when you get into each of the ports where you've got an hour and a half, electric bikes were often offered to make sure that you got the best out of the time ashore.
Was there a sense of there being more life and more population the further south you came?
Oh, without doubt. And, you know, whilst I loved it because it showed a different picture, I was also disappointed slightly because slowly it's like time change. You're being taken back to the world that you'd managed to forget about over the last 4 or 5 days. And in fact, by the time you get down to Bergen, the point of getting off and saying goodbye, you're almost in a city centre, a European city centre, and you know you don't want to be.
Stamsund is another place you stopped at for about 10 minutes, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Stamsund was one of the last stopovers on day 4 moving south. And again, it was right up in that wonderful midway through the cruise where there's lots to see, but it's not becoming yet too over-civilized. There's still lots of beautiful scenery. And once again this morning, the dexterity of this smaller vessel gives us a wonderful reward as we're able to get really close to this heritage site. In fact, this dates back to one of the earliest Norwegian settlements here in the fjord, where the Sami culture first met the Norwegian culture of today. And a lovely opportunity to see some of those early settlements.
And the world is getting smaller in many ways. One, because we can travel, so it's easier to get there. But also, there are so many places now which are becoming no-no. You can't go anymore because of the troubles around the world. There's so many places. Even South America, there's some fears of going down near the Falklands now because of there may be conflicts reopening down there.
Well, Norway is not adrift from some of the political barriers that it's having to contend with. Kirkenes, where the cruise began, of course, is a wonderful heritage of the history of the Russian allies freeing Kirkenes from Nazi Germany at the close of the war, and therefore is a very strong embrace, an affectionate embrace to Russian people. So I felt when we were there in Kirkenes, the current political environment of Ukraine has brought a portcullis down on Kirkenes, so the Russians now don't have access. And there's a great conscious feel from the people of Kirkenes. Talk to the cab drivers to say, this feels wrong. The Russians helped us.
Nesna. Do they all have different colours for their houses, or is the same red and green paint?
Well, firstly, the style of the house has changed enormously. I mean, when you're looking here, these are picturesque. In fact, this almost, doesn't it, looks like a model village that's been built by someone on the shoreline. Whereas you'll remember when we were further north in the first 3 or 4 days, we're now, I think, about day 4 here, when those first 2 or 3 days, the housing was more wooden, structured steel frames. Here you're moving into much more substantial buildings on the shoreline. The other thing to remember is there are a lot of huts and cabins. The Norwegian holiday is enjoying a home in the city centre and having a holiday cabin to get to out on the shoreline of the fjords. And there's lots of them, and no surprise, most families, I must be careful not to over-exaggerate, but most families in Norway have a cabin, or relatives have a cabin up in the fjords and in the islands, and it's a favourite escape. Absolute switch off from civilization. No Wi-Fi, not always main power, but a cabin that's your family cabin, that you can just shut yourself away for 2, 3, 4 days or a couple of weeks during the summer. And it's very important to them. It's part of a culture.
I have a shed at the bottom of my garden, very similar.
Well, if it is similar, I'm delighted that it brings you such a therapy. And I've not seen the end of your garden recently, but I'm never sure the scenery looks like this. And once again, we're approaching one of the regional harbours. This one of the largest cities in Norway, set on the island just south of the Arctic Circle. Reaching these harbours again is no easy task, but to a boat with the agility of the Capella, it's an easy manoeuvre to make.
So by now you're about 5 days into your cruise come voyage, and you've got to know your ship fairly well.
Yes.
So do you have favourite points on the ship, favourite little hideaways?
Yes, the word routine and rituals come into play, and I'm never sure whether routines and rituals are what we're escaping from, so we must be careful to say we don't make routines and rituals when we're cruising. But you're becoming more and more comfortable, aren't you? The ship now is becoming yours, as if it was designed and built for you. That cabin, you're probably the only couple ever to have enjoyed it. It's now home. And so you do start to do the shortcuts. You know the easy way of getting breakfast. You know the best time to get hold of breakfast. You cater your day around the timetable, the stop starting that this boat does regularly. Remember, every day you'll visit 6 or 7 ports, so there's lots to build your itinerary around. But I use the term routines and rituals in a way of becoming really comfortable. I think you're getting more out of it now. The midsection of this voyage is probably when you really are enjoying every moment of it.
You've sailed with Cunard, so you know what luxury is. Was this still luxury?
It was, Stuart. It's luxury, but it has a different definition behind it. I think looking back to the Cunard, it has all that almost Edwardian, Victorian, wonderful civility about it, whereas this is, if I may, much more contemporary. This talks to a much possibly younger audience. Certainly there's a lot of exploration behind this. It's the adventure that you're on together, much more than just sitting back and enjoying the experience of cruising. In fact, it was interesting to watch how much time most of the passengers spent on deck watching what's going on. And indeed, part of that is that if I was on Cunard, I've got theatres, cinemas, cocktail parties, casino. There's none of that on board this ship.
So, in fact, what we're saying here is that's an old-fashioned form of entertainment.
It's a form of entertainment that's possibly fit for purpose. I would choose Cunard again. I would enjoy that weekend or week of pure relaxation.
No, we're on Cunard next week, and we love it. But this looks to be a different kind of relaxation.
It's been put together very thoughtfully. They are absolutely clear of the sustainability of the world they're in. We've talked already about the fuel of the ship. The food is done in a very similar way. There are no extravagant buffets which are left full to the final moment and then discarded. Everything is done in a very single dish approach. You eat what's required and they prepare for you what's required. Everything on board is done with just enough. It's comfortable, but you feel nothing is there to go to waste.
It's an interesting term, really, just enough, because it stops at so many places, but the time it's there, you could argue, is just enough. I've stopped at a lot of cruise ports where you just go, oh, what, another church? And it's driving you mad. So with these shorter stops, you're seeing the place, but is it just enough, or do you wish you'd stayed longer?
Well, it's a great question. Just enough when it stops for 8, 10, 12 minutes, and some of the stops are short of that. there is an air of, gosh, I wish I could get off and look around this one. They do that cleverly. There's a northbound route where you find it's full of 8-minute stops or very sizable 1 to 1.5 hours. And if you do the southbound, they reverse it, where you stop for a brief time on the way north, you stop for a more considerable time on the way south.
Huge buildings compared with what we've been looking at. Factories as if they're canning the fish as well as catching it.
Well, we're here at the port of Brøndesund, which is fairly well south, and you're now beginning to get into that cast that you're talking of between the joys of the remote scenery that we've left behind, and we're now beginning to touch some of the industrial south of Norway, but still with this magnificent backdrop of the beautiful islands. This is an interesting part of the world, and again, you're now beginning to offer salmon farming, trout farming, lots of visits from the ship during this stopover to go and visit those and indeed enjoy and refresh yourselves. Big learning, everything closes in Norway on a Sunday.
Oh, absolutely. Even in Stavanger. Trust me, if you turn up on Stavanger on a Sunday and go in the tourist office, they'll go, you can go to church.
Yes.
Thank you.
Beautifully put. That was right. It was such a beautiful town to be in, except that nothing was open. You can walk all the way through it with wonderful memories of closed doors and little signs saying opening tomorrow.
Yeah. Now, the hole in the wall.
Oh, isn't it beautiful? Yeah, shot right through the centre. And a wonderful piece. And again, it reminds me that before we saw this, you're invited into the conference room on board and you're given a pretty thorough story of the heritage of how this happened, going back to the volcanic era, and how the rest of the cliffs eroded, revealing what we're about to see here. So if you want to invest the time, the conference room will do this on 2-3 times a day to keep up to date before you travel south.
Sadly, that's a thing I think is vanishing from many ships now, is the port lectures and the history.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. It's manpower. You just can't get enough people to service all the ships.
It's a great shame, because the one piece I come away remembering from this is exploration. Not only did I visit so many special places, I was given the facility to understand them and get behind the scenes before I arrived there.
So here's the electric you're talking about.
There it is, yeah, plugging in. We're now right down in Trondheim, so in a way we're down in the city centre now, a long way from some of those remote fjords, but a chance to fully recharge. And it's recharging both the electric power and the LNG gas. Big source of income in Norway. They are one of the world's largest harvesters of LNG gas. And Havila has been very quick to pick this clean fuel up as an ideal way of fueling its fleet. LNG gas plus the largest electric batteries on board make these the cleanest fleet on the ocean. Low to nil admission, which also gives them permission to enter some of the heritage fjords, where the so-called dirtier fuels would not be welcome. As we pull away from the harbour, refueled and reloaded, the sister ship Polaris is patiently waiting to come alongside. Certainly a moment to be celebrated when two of the fleet pass each other. Here at Trondheim, we've caught up with sister ship Polaris. We're travelling on the southern journey. Polaris is retracing our steps, travelling north. 24/7, 365 days a year. These ships continue to ferry the passengers, the supplies, the mail up and down the Norwegian fjords.
I should say here that Martin has a full ship tour of the Havila ship, which is elsewhere on this Doris Visits site. So you can get the full ship tour. But this is a podcast special, where I get to talk to Martin Clarkson about travelling down from Kirkenes near Russia all the way to Bergen.
When we came on board, we thought maybe we were joining a cruise, but we weren't joining a cruise. We were joining what Havila call a voyage, and I like that much more, the word voyage. It's sort of flirting with expedition, which is what this is. It's an expedition because of the dexterity and size of these vessels, their agility. They're able to enter and exit all the fjords that the other cruise ships couldn't reach. Firstly, because of their size, but secondly, because of the clean LNG gas and electric power of these vessels, which makes them low or nil emission. They have permission to enter some of the heritage sites here in Norway that the dirtier fuel vessels wouldn't be invited to.
Although there have been settlements here in Kristiansand from as early as 8000 BCE, in fact, that's the end of the last ice age, it's a fairly new town because it was bombed extensively during World War II. It was the Danish-Norwegian King Christian VI who founded the town in 1742. His name was given to the town. Sund means strait, or the water that runs between the islands. And his name was spelt with a CH, as was the original name of this town. Now, I tell you what I've not seen. I've not seen any oil or gas rigs.
No, and I don't know my geography well enough. I suspect that's going to be further inland from where we were. What you have seen, and we'll see it in some of the footage, are those on the port side. So 2 or 3 of the key ports have got LNG storage tanks for the ships, and indeed electric chargers from their hydroelectric power.
But there's not even a windmill there. I don't even see any windmills.
No.
So where are they?
Well, it's hydroelectric power. That's their big piece, is hydroelectric.
On the BBC4 in England, we have a series. It's actually a Norwegian television series called State of Happiness, which is all about Stavanger in the 1970s and the beginning of the exploration of oil and gas. It is an absolutely brilliant TV series, so wow. I do suggest, if you've not seen it, try and dig it out on BBC Catch Up, State of Happiness.
Oh, I'd love that. Well, I'm gonna take your reference from that and check that out, because it would be I wish I'd seen it before I disappeared on the cruise, because there's a culture backdrop to it.
The interesting thing is, we're not seeing Stavanger here. We're going to see Bergen, but in Stavanger they've got this little village. It's like a model village, of tiny little white houses, and they used it in the TV series because it hasn't changed since 1970. It's the same.
Interesting here, you're saying we're in Bergen, so the larger cruise ships here obviously can come into Bergen harbour. So suddenly we felt a fairly small player. Whilst I felt we were on the largest ship in the fjords, suddenly to scale, you begin to realise that the reason we're able to navigate our way is that we are considerably smaller than these larger ships. And in doing that, you do have to forego the theatres, the casinos, the films, the cocktail bars. There's no space for that.
Well, Martin, I'm just going to really thank you for walking us through your sail down from Russia all the way down the Norwegian coast past Sweden and down into Bergen, which a lot of our cruisers will know Bergen very well, but they won't know any of the ports that you've just shown them.
Well, thank you for that. It was a privilege. You challenged me to join the Doris Visits brand, and I've enjoyed Doris Visits, as you know, for a long time. I think all of us learn a great deal from a wonderful series that's available to us. So to have this added to that as a backdrop, a privilege.
Well, it's an example of how we learn from each other. So if you are on one of these voyages and you film it, then do let me know and we can add it to Doris Visits. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Stuart.
So, would I recommend it?
Yeah, if this is exactly what you're looking for, the peace, the quiet, and the tranquility of visiting some of the most beautiful scenery in the world, yeah, come on this. Come and see for yourself.
And take a book with you. Start with Cruise Ship Heist, and please review it after you've read it. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Martin.